I am going to need your badge, Mr. Cole. The security guard's voice was barely above a whisper, his eyes fixed somewhere over Nathan's left shoulder, unable or unwilling to meet his gaze. Nathan Cole stood frozen in the doorway of the office he had occupied for the past 3 years. The office he had earned through 8 years of early mornings and late nights and unwavering dedication to a company that had just thrown him away like yesterday's garbage. The rain was coming down hard outside the floor-to-ceiling windows of Hartwell Industries, sheets of water cascading down the glass like the building itself was weeping. Nathan looked down at the cardboard box in his hands. It contained everything he had accumulated in 8 years of service. A coffee mug that said "World's Best Dad" in Emma's wobbly handwriting, a photograph of his late wife Grace on their wedding day, a small cactus that somehow had survived his notorious inability to keep plants alive, and a stack of performance reviews that all said the same thing. Exceeds expectations, valuable team member, asset to the company. None of it mattered now. It was 4:17 on a Thursday afternoon, and Nathan Cole's world had just collapsed. He unclipped his badge with fingers that felt thick and clumsy like they belonged to someone else. The laminated card bore his photograph, his name, his title. Facilities Coordinator. 8 years of his life reduced to a piece of plastic that would be deactivated before he reached the parking lot. "I do not understand," Nathan said, though he knew the words were useless. He had already said them a dozen times in the HR director's office, had repeated them like a prayer, while Craig Lawson shuffled papers and avoided his questions. "My reviews have always been positive. I have never had a single complaint. There has to be some mistake." The security guard, a young man Nathan had trained personally just 6 months ago, finally met his eyes. What Nathan saw there was not hostility or indifference. It was pity. Pure, devastating pity. "I am sorry, Mr. Cole. I really am. But I have my orders." Nathan nodded slowly. Of course he did. Everyone had their orders. That was how it worked in places like this. Orders came down from above and people followed them without question, and somewhere at the bottom someone like Nathan got crushed. He handed over his badge and walked toward the elevator, the cardboard box clutched against his chest like a shield. The office was quiet around him. His former colleagues sat at their desks, eyes fixed on their computer screens with an intensity that was almost comical. No one looked up. No one said goodbye. 8 years, and he had become invisible in the span of an afternoon. The elevator ride down felt endless. Nathan stared at his reflection in the polished metal doors at the face of a man he barely recognized. He was 36 years old with dark hair that was starting to show threads of gray at the temples and brown eyes that had seen too much loss for one lifetime. His hands were the hands of a working man, calloused and strong, the kind of hands that could fix a broken pipe or assemble a child's bicycle or hold a dying wife's fingers as she slipped away. Those hands were shaking now. The lobby was all marble and glass, designed to impress visitors with Hartwell Industries' success and prestige. Nathan had always felt a small surge of pride walking through it, knowing that he played a role in keeping this place running smoothly. Now it felt like a mausoleum, cold and impersonal, and utterly indifferent to his existence. The rain hit him like a physical blow when he stepped outside. He had forgotten his umbrella, but it did not matter. Nothing mattered. He stood on the sidewalk in front of the building that had been his second home for nearly a decade, rain soaking through his shirt and plastering his hair to his forehead, and he let himself feel it. The cold, the wet, the crushing weight of failure pressing down on his chest until he could barely breathe. The termination letter in his pocket cited corporate restructuring. Such clean, clinical words for something so devastating. There was no mention of the $847 in his bank account, the rent due in 5 days, or the 7-year-old daughter who was waiting for him at the after-school program, probably drawing pictures of the two of them and wondering why Daddy was late. Nathan made it to his car before his legs gave out. The Honda Accord was 12 years old, with 180,000 miles on the odometer and a passenger door that stuck in cold weather, but it was paid off, and right now that felt like the only thing in his life that was not about to be taken away. He sat behind the wheel, rain drumming on the roof, and pulled out the termination papers. His hands were trembling so badly that the words blurred and jumped on the page. He read them once, twice, 3 times, as if repetition might somehow change their meaning. Effective immediately, no severance. Benefits terminated, no severance. After 8 years of perfect attendance, of solving problems no one else wanted to touch, of being the first one in and the last one out, no severance. Nathan thought about Emma, about the school supplies she would need next month, and the winter coat she had outgrown, and the birthday party she was supposed to have in 3 weeks. He thought about the stack of bills on his kitchen counter, the car insurance due at the end of the month, the grocery list on his refrigerator that he could no longer afford to fill. And then he thought about Grace. What would she say if she could see him now? His beautiful, fierce, unstoppable Grace, who had fought cancer with the same determination she brought to everything else in her life, who had held on through 18 months of chemotherapy and radiation and experimental treatments, held on until Emma's 2nd birthday, because she had promised their daughter she would be there for it. She had kept that promise. And then, 3 weeks later, she was gone. Nathan pressed his forehead against the steering wheel and let out a sound that was somewhere between a laugh and a sob. Grace would tell him to get up. She would tell him to stop feeling sorry for himself and figure out a plan. She would remind him that Emma needed him, that falling apart was not an option, that he was stronger than he knew. But Grace was not here, and Nathan was not sure he was strong at all. The drive to Emma's after-school program passed in a blur of rain and traffic lights and the constant gnawing fear that had taken up residence in his chest. By the time he pulled into the apartment complex parking lot, the sky had darkened to the color of a bruise, and the rain had settled into a steady, relentless downpour. That is when he saw the yellow paper taped to his door. Nathan's heart stopped. He knew what it was before he even got close enough to read the words. He had seen notices like this on other doors in the complex, had watched neighbors pack their belongings into U-Hauls and drive away with hollow eyes and defeated shoulders. He had always felt a distant sympathy for them, the vague gratitude of someone who had narrowly avoided disaster. Now disaster had found him. Eviction notice. 30 days. The word swam before his eyes. He had been late on the rent twice in 8 years. Twice. Both times during Grace's illness, when the medical bills had piled up faster than he could pay them. Both times he had caught up within a week, had apologized profusely to the landlord, had promised it would never happen again. Apparently, those promises meant nothing. Apparently, the landlord had been waiting for an excuse. Nathan stood in the rain, reading the notice over and over as if the words might rearrange themselves into something survivable. 30 days. He had 30 days to find a new job, a new apartment, a new life. 30 days to figure out how to explain to his 7-year-old daughter that Daddy had failed her. A small sound made him turn. Emma was watching him through the window of his car, her face pressed against the glass, her breath fogging the surface. She was holding Mr. Whiskers, the stuffed bunny that had been her constant companion since Grace's death. Her eyes were wide and worried old beyond her years. Nathan folded the eviction notice and shoved it into his pocket. He walked back to the car, slowly giving himself time to arrange his face into something that might pass for calm. When he climbed into the driver's seat, rain dripping from his hair and running down his collar, Emma was still watching him with those 2 knowing eyes. "Daddy," she whispered. "What do we do now?" Nathan opened his mouth to answer, but no words came out. His throat had closed up and his chest was so tight he could barely breathe, and for the first time in his life he had absolutely no idea what to say to his daughter. He forced himself to smile. It felt like cracking glass. "We are going to be fine, sweetheart," he said. "This is just temporary, like camping." Emma nodded slowly, but she did not smile back. She was 7 years old, and she had already learned that sometimes adults lied to protect you, and sometimes the truth was too heavy for anyone to carry alone. She did not believe him, and God help him, neither did he. The black Mercedes glided through the rain like a shark through dark water, its headlights cutting twin beams through the gathering dusk. Inside, Serena Hayes sat in the back seat, her attention divided between the quarterly reports on her tablet and the gray world sliding past her window. She was 34 years old, with blonde hair swept back in an elegant chignon and eyes the color of a winter sky. Her charcoal blazer was tailored to perfection, and her jewelry was minimal but expensive. Small diamond studs, a thin gold watch, a ring her grandmother had left her. She looked exactly like what she was. The CEO of Hartwell Industries, one of the most powerful women in the city and one of the loneliest people alive. "Traffic is backing up on Madison," her driver said. "I will take the alternate route." "Fine," Serena replied, not looking up from her tablet. The numbers on the screen were good. Better than good, actually. The restructuring was proceeding ahead of schedule, costs were down, and the board was pleased. Everything was going according to plan. So, why could she not shake this feeling of unease? The Mercedes turned onto a side street, passing by a small apartment complex that Serena had never noticed before. She glanced out the window absently, her mind still on profit margins and shareholder expectations, and that is when she saw them. A man standing in the rain, his shirt soaked through his shoulders, hunched against the cold. He was reading something, a piece of paper that he held in hands that were visibly shaking. Near him, parked in a spot that was slowly flooding with rainwater, was an old Honda Accord with a child's face pressed against the passenger window. A little girl, maybe 7 or 8, blonde hair and pigtails, holding what looked like a stuffed animal. Serena's breath caught in her throat. She watched as the man finished reading and shoved the paper into his pocket. Even from this distance, even through the rain, she could see the devastation on his face. It was the look of someone who had just received news that would break them. The look of someone whose world had just ended. And then he turned toward his car, toward his daughter, and Serena saw him do something that made her chest ache with recognition. She watched him straighten his shoulders, arrange his face into a smile that probably looked convincing from a distance, and climb back into the car with the careful movements of a man holding himself together through sheer force of will. She knew that performance. She had given it herself 1,000 times. "Stop the car," Serena said suddenly. Her driver glanced at her in the rearview mirror, surprised. "Ma'am, nothing. Keep going." The Mercedes pulled away, and Serena twisted in her seat to look back at the old Honda, at the man and the little girl who were growing smaller in the distance. Something was nagging at her, a connection she could not quite make. The man's face had been familiar somehow. She was sure she had seen him before. And then it clicked. This morning. The termination lists. She had signed off on dozens of names, trusting that her management team had made fair decisions based on performance data and company needs. One of those names had been a facilities coordinator. 8 years of service. Position eliminated due to restructuring. Cole. His name was Cole. Serena pulled up the personnel files on her tablet, scrolling until she found it. Nathan Cole, age 36, facilities coordinator. His photograph showed a man with dark hair and kind eyes and a smile that suggested he was the type of person who still believed hard work meant something. She had signed the paper that ended his career this morning, and now he was standing in the rain outside his apartment reading what was almost certainly an eviction notice, trying to figure out how to explain to his daughter that everything was about to fall apart. "Ma'am, is everything all right?" Serena realized she had been staring at her tablet without seeing it. "Yes. Fine. Everything is fine." But as the Mercedes carried her toward her penthouse, toward the empty rooms, and the silence that waited for her there, she could not stop thinking about Nathan Cole. about the way he had squared his shoulders before facing his daughter, about the little girl's face pressed against the window, watching her father with eyes that already knew too much about loss. She told herself it was not her fault. The restructuring had been necessary. The board had demanded cuts, and her team had made the decisions. She had simply signed the papers, trusting that the process had been fair. But somewhere deep inside, in a place she had learned to ignore years ago, something whispered that trust was not enough. That her signature on those documents made her responsible regardless of what she had or had not known. The image of that little girl's face stayed with her all the way home. And when she finally fell asleep that night alone in her king-sized bed in her 40th floor penthouse, she dreamed of rain. Before we continue, please tell us where in the world are you tuning in from. We love seeing how far our stories travel. The Human Resources office smelled like stale coffee and industrial carpet cleaner. Nathan had arrived 15 minutes before opening, positioning himself outside the door like a supplicant waiting for an audience with a king. He was wearing his best shirt, the white one Grace had bought him for their anniversary 3 years ago, and he had shaved carefully despite his shaking hands. If he was going to beg for his job back, he was at least going to look presentable doing it. The receptionist made him wait 45 minutes before anyone would see him. He sat in a plastic chair that squeaked every time he shifted his weight, watching other employees come and go, trying not to notice the way they avoided looking at him. Word had clearly gotten around. Nathan Cole, the guy who got fired. Best to keep your distance in case whatever he had was contagious. Finally, a door opened and a woman with a clipboard called his name. Craig Lawson's office was exactly what Nathan had expected. Motivational posters on the walls, a desk cluttered with paperwork, and an atmosphere of aggressive mediocrity. Craig himself was a soft-faced man in his 50s with the kind of smile that never quite reached his eyes and hands that were always in motion, shuffling papers, adjusting his tie, drumming his fingers on the desk. "Mr. Cole," Craig said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. "Please, sit down. What can I do for you?" Nathan sat. He had rehearsed this speech a dozen times and the car had practiced keeping his voice calm and his arguments logical. He could not afford to let emotion take over. This was about convincing Craig Lawson that he was worth keeping, not about expressing how terrified and angry and desperate he really felt. "I would like to discuss my termination," Nathan began. "I have been with this company for 8 years. My performance reviews have been consistently positive. I have never had a complaint filed against me, never missed a deadline, never given anyone reason to question my commitment." He paused, choosing his next words carefully. "I think there might have been a mistake." Craig was shuffling papers without reading them, his expression already settling into the polite disinterest of someone who had made up his mind before the conversation started. "I appreciate you coming in, Mr. Cole. I understand this must be difficult for you. Is there any possibility of a different position?" Nathan pressed on. "Another department, maybe? I am willing to take a pay cut. I am willing to start over at the bottom if I have to. I just need to keep working." His voice cracked on the last word, and he hated himself for it. He had promised himself he would not show weakness. But he was thinking about Emma, about the eviction notice, about the $847. That was all that stood between his daughter and homelessness. Craig's smile did not waver. It was the smile of a man who had delivered bad news so many times that it no longer affected him, like a doctor who had learned to see patients as collections of symptoms rather than human beings. "I am sorry, Mr. Cole. There is nothing available for someone in your situation." The word hit Nathan like a slap. "My situation? What does that mean? This company is moving in a new direction. Some people just are not the right fit anymore." Craig shrugged as if they were discussing the weather rather than a man's entire livelihood. "I am sure you understand." Nathan did not understand. He sat there waiting for something more, some explanation that made sense, some acknowledgement that 8 years of his life deserved more than a shrug and a dismissal. But Craig had already turned back to his computer. his fingers clicking across the keyboard as if Nathan had already left, as if he had never been there at all. Nathan found himself standing in the parking lot 15 minutes later with no clear memory of how he had gotten there. His body was trembling not from cold, but from the effort of holding back everything that wanted to explode out of him. The rage, the fear, the crushing sense of injustice that made him want to scream until his throat bled. He leaned against his car and pressed his hands against his eyes until he saw stars. Grace. God, he missed Grace. She would have known what to do. She would have marched into that HR office and demanded answers, would have made Craig Lawson regret every condescending word. She had been the strong one in their marriage, the fighter, the one who never backed down from a challenge. Without her, Nathan felt like half a person, like a boat without an anchor drifting further and further from shore. He looked across the street at the Hartwell Industries building, at the gleaming glass and steel tower that had been his workplace for 8 years. Somewhere up there in offices he would never see again. People were going about their days as if nothing had happened. As if Nathan Cole had never existed. He had $847 a car with 180,000 miles on it, and 30 days before he and his daughter were homeless. And nobody in that building cared. The cemetery was quiet in the late afternoon, the graves dotted with flowers and small flags that visitors had left behind. Nathan parked near the old oak tree and walked the familiar path to Grace's headstone, his feet finding their way automatically after countless visits. Grace Ellen Cole, beloved wife and mother, 1988 to 2022. I carry your heart with me. Nathan knelt on the wet grass, not caring that the dampness soaked through his pants. He reached out and traced the letters of her name, feeling the cold stone beneath his fingertips. I am in trouble, Grace, he whispered. Real trouble this time. I lost my job. We are about to lose the apartment, and I do not know what to do. The wind stirred the branches of the oak tree overhead, and for a moment, Nathan could almost imagine it was her voice, soft and familiar, telling him to get up and keep fighting. He closed his eyes, and the memories came flooding back. Grace at 23 walking into the coffee shop where he worked as a barista, ordering a latte with her nose buried in a book. He had been so nervous that he spelled her name wrong on the cup, and she had laughed, and that laugh had changed everything. Grace at 26 standing at the altar in a simple white dress, tears streaming down her face as she said her vows. He had stepped on her feet during their first dance, and she had whispered that it was the best dance she had ever had. Grace at 30, holding a positive pregnancy test, her eyes wide with wonder and terror and joy. They had stood in their tiny bathroom laughing and crying and making plans for a future that seemed impossibly bright. And then Grace at 32 sitting in a doctor's office hearing words that no one should ever have to hear. Ovarian cancer. Stage 3. We will fight it together. They had fought. God, how they had fought. 18 months of chemotherapy and radiation and experimental treatments that drained their savings and left Grace so weak she could barely lift her head. 18 months of hoping and praying and refusing to accept what seemed inevitable. She had held on for Emma's 2nd birthday, had sung Happy Birthday in a voice that was barely a whisper, had watched their daughter blow out the candles with eyes that were already fading. 3 weeks later, she was gone. You told me not to let her forget you, Nathan said to the headstone. And I have not. Emma knows every story, every song, every recipe. She knows you loved purple flowers and old movies and dancing in the kitchen. His voice broke. But you also told me not to forget to live. And I am trying, Grace. I am trying so hard. But I do not know how to do this without you. He stayed there until the sun began to set, talking to a stone that could not answer, finding comfort in the one-sided conversation. When he finally stood, his legs stiff from kneeling, he felt something that might have been resolve settling into his bones. Grace would want him to fight. Grace would want him to be strong for Emma. He could fall apart later. Right now, his daughter needed him. Emma was quiet when he picked her up from Mrs. Patterson's apartment where she had been waiting after school. She clutched Mr. Whiskers against her chest and did not ask any questions, which somehow made everything worse. 7 years old, and she had already learned that sometimes the answers were too terrible to hear. They drove to their apartment one last time to gather what they could carry. Nathan moved through the rooms like a ghost, shoving clothes and toiletries into garbage bags while Emma filled her small backpack with treasures. Mr. Whiskers, 3 library books that were now overdue the photograph of Grace that sat on her nightstand. Daddy Emma's voice was small. "Are we coming back?" Nathan looked around at the apartment that had been their home for 5 years. The marks on the doorframe where he had measured Emma's height every birthday. The kitchen where Grace used to make Sunday pancakes. The living room where they had built pillow forts and watched movies and fallen asleep in a pile on the couch. "Not for a while, sweetheart," he said. "We are going on an adventure." Emma did not argue. She just nodded and slipped her hand into his, and together they walked out the door. The parking lot behind the shuttered grocery store was dark and quiet, far enough from the main road that no one would notice a car parked there overnight. Nathan had found it yesterday during a desperate search for somewhere safe to sleep, somewhere they could hide from the world while he figured out what to do next. He reclined the back seat as far as it would go and laid out the blankets he had grabbed from the apartment, creating a nest for Emma in the space behind the front seats. She watched him work, her face serious and pale. "Is this like camping?" she asked. "Exactly like camping," Nathan said, forcing brightness into his voice. "Remember when we went to the lake with Mommy, how we slept in the tent and heard the owls at night?" Emma's eyes softened at the mention of her mother. "Mommy said the owls were telling bedtime stories." "That is right, she did." Nathan tucked the blankets around his daughter, smoothing her hair back from her forehead. "And tonight, maybe we will hear some owls, too." Emma was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Daddy, this is different from camping. We do not have a tent." "And you are sad." The words hit Nathan like a punch to the chest. He wanted to lie, wanted to tell her that everything was fine, that there was nothing to worry about. But Emma had Grace's eyes, Grace's intuition, Grace's ability to see straight through to the truth. "I am sad, sweetheart," he admitted. "But that does not mean we are not going to be okay. We have each other, right? And that is the most important thing." Emma considered this, her small face thoughtful. "Mommy used to say that home is not a place. It is the people who love you." Nathan's throat closed up. Grace had said that during those last terrible months when they had talked about what would happen after she was gone. "Home is wherever you and Emma are," she had told him. "Do not forget that. Your mommy was very smart," he managed. "I know." Emma yawned and cuddled Mr. Whiskers closer. "Daddy, I think Mommy is watching us, like a guardian angel. She would not let anything bad happen to us." Nathan leaned down and kissed her forehead, breathing in the familiar scent of her strawberry shampoo. "I think you are right, sweetheart. I think she is watching over us right now." Emma fell asleep eventually, her small hand curled around Mr. Whiskers' ear, her breathing slow and steady. Nathan stayed awake, watching the rain streak down the windshield, listening to the occasional rumble of a truck passing on the highway. The photograph of Grace was tucked into the sun visor above him. He reached up and touched it, gently tracing the curve of her smile. "I am sorry," he whispered into the darkness. "I promised I would take care of her. I promised I would give her everything you could not." The rain continued to fall, and somewhere in the distance an owl called out its lonely song. Nathan closed his eyes and tried to remember how to pray. 40 floors above the city, in a penthouse that cost more than most people earned in a lifetime. Serena Hayes sat alone in the dark. The apartment was a masterpiece of modern design. all clean lines and expensive materials and breathtaking views of the skyline. It had been featured in architectural magazines, had been the setting for countless business dinners and cocktail parties and carefully orchestrated social events. It was the kind of place that impressed people, that made them understand exactly how successful and powerful its owner was. It was also, Serena had come to realize, the loneliest place on earth. She sat in her favorite chair by the window, watching the rain streak down the glass, a glass of wine untouched on the table beside her. She had changed out of her business clothes into silk pajamas, had let her hair down from its careful arrangement, had tried to become someone other than the CEO of Hartwell Industries. But the image of the man and the little girl would not leave her alone. Nathan Cole. She had looked him up again after returning home, had read through his personnel file with growing unease. 8 years of exemplary service, not a single complaint, performance reviews that consistently exceeded expectations. And yet someone had decided he was expendable. Someone had signed his termination papers without severance, without warning, without any acknowledgement of the years he had given to the company. That someone was her. Serena stood abruptly and walked to her desk, pulling open the drawer where she kept the things she did not want anyone to see. Her grandmother's letters, a dried flower from a garden that no longer existed, and a photograph worn at the edges from years of handling. She was 19 in the picture, standing in a sun-drenched garden with her arm around a young man with dark hair and a crooked smile. Daniel. His name was Daniel, and 15 years later, his face still had the power to make her chest ache with loss. He had been a groundskeeper at her family's estate the summer between her freshman and sophomore years of college. Serena had been young and sheltered and desperately lonely, trapped in a life of expectations and obligations that felt like a gilded cage. Daniel had been kind and funny and completely unimpressed by her family's money. He had taught her to plant tomatoes, had shown her the constellations on clear nights, had made her feel for the first time in her life like she was more than just her father's daughter. They had fallen in love the way young people do, recklessly and completely convinced that nothing could ever tear them apart. They had been wrong. Her father had discovered them together at the end of summer, had found them kissing in the garden behind the greenhouse. The explosion that followed had been biblical in its fury. Threats, ultimatums, cold, calculated cruelty delivered in a voice that never rose above a whisper. Daniel was gone by morning. Serena never found out if her father had paid him off or simply threatened him into disappearing. She only knew that one day he was there holding her hand and making plans for a future they would build together, and the next day he was a ghost. People like us do not marry people like them, her father had said. You will understand when you are older. She was older now. 34 years old, the CEO of a company worth billions, respected and feared by everyone who knew her name. She had everything her father had wanted for her. Power, success, a life of luxury and influence, and she was absolutely, completely alone. Serena looked at the photograph one more time, at Daniel's crooked smile, at her own face, lit up with a happiness she had never felt since. Then she put it back in the drawer and closed it firmly. She had learned her lesson 15 years ago. Love was a vulnerability she could not afford. Trust was a liability that would only lead to disappointment. The only person you could really count on was yourself. But tonight, sitting in her empty penthouse with the rain falling outside her window, she could not stop thinking about Nathan Cole. About the way he had straightened his shoulders before facing his daughter. About the fierce determination she had seen in his posture even from a distance. He reminded her of Daniel, not in looks, but in something more essential. A fundamental decency that seemed to radiate from him, a willingness to fight for the people he loved no matter the odds. And she had been the one to destroy him. Serena picked up her wine glass and finally took a sip. It was expensive, perfectly aged, exactly what she would have ordered at any restaurant in the city. It tasted like ashes. 3 days passed like a fever dream. Nathan fell into a survival routine that was equal parts exhausting and soul-crushing. Each morning he woke before dawn in the back seat of his car, every muscle aching from sleeping in positions the human body was never meant to occupy. He would drive to the gas station near Hartwell Industries to use the restroom, then drop Emma at the public library before heading to the harbor. The work there was brutal, loading and unloading cargo ships for 12 hours straight in all weather for cash that barely covered gas and food. Nathan's hands blistered and bled, his back screamed in protest, and his shoulders felt like they were being pulled from their sockets. But he did not complain. Complaining was a luxury he could not afford. The money was just enough to keep the car running, just enough to buy cheap groceries, just enough to give Emma breakfast and dinner even if he had to skip meals himself. He was not proud. He had left pride behind somewhere between the HR office and the eviction notice. All that mattered now was keeping his daughter fed and safe. Emma spent her days at the Pine Street Public Library, a beautiful old building with high ceilings and tall windows that let in the soft afternoon light. She had discovered it on their second day of homelessness, had walked in with her small backpack and Mr. Whiskers, and immediately felt at home. The head librarian was a woman named Dorothy Chen, 73 years old, with silver hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. She had noticed Emma within an hour of her arrival, had watched the little girl settle into a corner of the children's section with a determination that was heartbreaking in someone so young. Mrs. Chen did not ask questions. She had worked at the library for 42 years and had seen more than her share of families in crisis. She knew the signs. The carefully maintained clothes that were just slightly too small, the way Emma's eyes lingered on the vending machine without ever asking for money, the stuffed bunny that never left her arms. Instead of prying, Mrs. Chen simply helped. She started leaving crackers and juice boxes near Emma's usual spot, claiming they were leftover from a reading reward program that did not actually exist. She made sure the children's section was always warm and well lit. She recommended books about brave princesses and daring adventures, stories about characters who lost everything but found something better in the end. Emma knew the truth, She was 7, not stupid, but she accepted the kindness with grace, understanding instinctively that Mrs. Chen needed to help as much as Emma needed the help. "Mr. Whiskers," Emma whispered one afternoon, holding the worn, stuffed bunny up to face a particularly exciting passage in her book. "This princess is like us. She lost her castle, but she is going to find a better one. You will see." Mrs. Chen, passing by with an armful of returns, felt her heart crack open a little at the words. This child, this brave, resilient, impossible child, was already learning the hardest lesson in the world. That sometimes you had to keep believing even when everything seemed hopeless. Nathan picked Emma up each evening smelling of fish and diesel and exhaustion. His hands were wrapped in tape where the blisters had broken and bled, and there were new lines on his face that had not been there a week ago. But he always smiled when he saw her, always asked about her day, about what she had read, about the adventures she had imagined. Always made her feel like she was the most important person in the world. They had dinner at the community center on Maple Street, a place that offered free meals and hot showers to anyone who needed them. Nathan had swallowed his pride the first time he walked through those doors, had felt the hot flush of shame creeping up his neck as he accepted a bowl of soup from a volunteer who could not meet his eyes. But Emma had looked up at him with such simple trust, such complete faith that her father would take care of her, that the shame had faded into something else. Determination. Resolve. He would get through this. He had to. Daddy, Emma said one evening as they ate their soup together, "Mrs. Chen at the library is really nice. She lets me stay in the children's section as long as I want, and she always has crackers." "That is wonderful, sweetheart." Nathan forced himself to eat even though his stomach was churning with anxiety. "What did you read today?" Emma's eyes lit up. A book about a princess who learned to sword fight. She lost everything, but then she met these really kind people who helped her, and she became the greatest warrior in the whole kingdom. Nathan smiled genuinely this time. That sounds like an amazing story. It is. And you know what the best part was? What Emma looked at him with those wise old young eyes. The princess did not need anyone to save her. She saved herself. But she let people help her along the way because that is what brave people do. They let other people love them. Nathan's throat closed up. He reached across the table and squeezed his daughter's hand. You are pretty smart, you know that? Emma grinned. I know. I get it from Mommy. That night, lying awake in the back of the car while Emma slept peacefully beside him, Nathan thought about what his daughter had said, about letting people help, about being brave enough to accept love. Grace had told him something similar near the end. Do not close yourself off, she had whispered. Do not let losing me make you afraid to live. He had not understood then. He was not sure he understood now, but somewhere deep inside a small flame of hope was still burning. He just had to keep it alive long enough to find his way out of the dark. Serena could not let it go. For 3 days she had tried to focus on her work, tried to lose herself in quarterly reports and strategic planning and the endless demands of running a billion-dollar company. But every time she closed her eyes, she saw Nathan Cole's face. Every time she had a quiet moment, she thought about his daughter. On the 4th day, she gave up pretending. She stayed late at the office long after her assistant had gone home and the cleaning crew had finished their rounds. Alone in her corner office on the 32nd floor, surrounded by the trappings of success, she began to dig. Nathan Cole's personnel file was exactly as she remembered. 8 years of service, excellent performance reviews, no complaints, no disciplinary actions, no red flags of any kind. By every objective measure, he had been a model employee. So why had he been terminated? Serena scrolled through the documents until she found the appendix that had been attached to his termination papers. Low performance indicators, it was labeled. The numbers told a damning story. Dozens of missed shifts, declining work quality, multiple complaints from colleagues. None of it matched what she had seen in his actual file. Serena leaned back in her chair, her mind racing. Either someone had made a catastrophic clerical error, or someone had deliberately falsified the data. Given the dramatic discrepancy between the two sets of records, the latter seemed far more likely. But why? What possible reason could anyone have for targeting a facilities coordinator? She pulled up the internal security footage from the week before the layoffs, fast-forwarding through hours of mundane office activity, staff meetings, coffee breaks, the endless procession of people moving through the building without any awareness that their every movement was being recorded. And then she found it. Conference Room B, 3 days before the termination list was finalized. 2 men sitting across from each other at the polished table. Derek Palmer, the senior vice president, and Craig Lawson, the HR director who had dismissed Nathan so coldly. Serena watched as Derek slid a manila folder across the table. She could not hear what they were saying, but she could see the satisfied smile on Derek's face as Craig opened the folder and began to read. After a few minutes, Craig nodded, stood up, and walked directly to his computer. Serena cross-referenced the timestamp with the digital logs. At that exact moment, Craig Lawson had accessed Nathan Cole's personnel file. He had changed the performance metrics. He had added false complaints. He had manufactured documentation that transformed a loyal, competent employee into someone who appeared expendable. The discovery should have made her feel vindicated. Instead, it made her feel sick. She kept digging, following the trail of breadcrumbs that Derek Palmer and Craig Lawson had left behind. Budget discrepancies, invoices for services that had never been rendered, shell companies with offshore accounts that traced back to Derek Palmer's brother-in-law, $3.7 million. That is how much they had stolen from Hartwell Industries over the past 2 years. And Nathan Cole, it turned out, had been getting too close to the truth. His job in facilities had given him access to the loading docks and supply rooms, the areas where equipment and materials passed through without much oversight. He had filed 3 separate reports about suspicious deliveries shipments that did not match purchase orders, boxes that arrived empty, but were logged as full. Each time, his concerns had been dismissed. Now Serena understood why. Nathan Cole had not been fired for poor performance. He had been fired because he was a threat, because he had been asking questions that someone did not want answered, because Derek Palmer and Craig Lawson had decided that silencing him was easier than covering their tracks. And Serena, trusting her team, had signed off on it without a second glance. She sat with that knowledge for a long time, the weight of it pressing down on her chest until she could barely breathe. She could bury this. She could let Nathan Cole remain a casualty of restructuring and focus on cleaning up the corruption quietly. It would be easier, safer, better for the company's image. But every time she considered that option, she saw the little girl's face pressed against the car window. She heard her own voice, cool and professional, approving a list of names without question. Her signature was on those documents. Her name. Her authority. Whatever had happened to Nathan Cole, she was responsible. The question now was, what was she going to do about it? Serena hired a private investigator the next morning. Discreet and professional, someone who knew how to find people who did not want to be found. The report came back within 24 hours. Nathan Cole and his daughter were still in the city, moving from parking lot to parking lot, staying one step ahead of security guards and police patrols. Nathan had found work at the harbor loading cargo for cash. 12-hour shifts that paid barely enough to survive. The little girl spent her days at the Pine Street Public Library, where an elderly librarian had apparently taken her under her wing. Serena read the report 3 times, each word hitting her like a physical blow. She had done this. Her signature had set this chain of events in motion. A man and his child were living in their car because she had trusted the wrong people. She drove to the harbor herself. No driver, no assistant, no entourage. Just Serena Hayes in her cashmere coat and designer heels, walking through a world she had never seen from the inside of her luxury car. The docks smelled of fish and diesel and salt water, a pungent mixture that made her eyes water. Warehouses lined the waterfront, their corrugated metal walls streaked with rust and graffiti. Men in work clothes moved between shipping containers, shouting to each other in a language of hand signals and profanity that Serena did not understand. She found Nathan in one of the smaller warehouses, stacking crates with the mechanical efficiency of someone who had been doing this work for days. He looked different than she remembered. Thinner, with dark circles under his eyes, and a new weariness in the way he held himself. His hands were wrapped in tape, and she could see dried blood seeping through in places where the blisters had broken. She watched him for several minutes before he noticed her. When he finally looked up, his expression went from confusion to recognition to something cold and closed like a door slamming shut. He set down the crate he was carrying and walked toward her slowly, his jaw tight. "You are the CEO." It was not a question. Serena nodded. "My name is Serena Hayes. I need to speak with you, Mr. Cole." Nathan's laugh was harsh and humorless. "About what?" "Coming to make sure I am not causing problems. Do not worry, I am not going to sue. I could not afford a lawyer even if I wanted one. That is not why I am here." Serena hesitated, searching for the right words. 15 years of boardroom negotiations had not prepared her for this conversation, for facing the human cost of her decisions. "I am here because I made a mistake," she said finally, "and I am trying to understand what happened." Nathan stared at her for a long moment, his eyes filled with a pain that made her want to look away. "What happened?" he said slowly. "Is that your company threw me out like garbage. What happened is that my daughter sleeps in a car now. That is what happened, Miss Hayes. You want to understand that." His voice cracked on the last word, and he turned away, running a hand over his face. Serena could see his shoulders shaking, could see the effort it took for him to hold himself together. She stood very still, absorbing his anger like a penance. She could have defended herself. She could have explained about the falsified records, the corruption, the board pressure. But none of that would matter to him. None of that would give him back the weeks he had lost, the dignity that had been stripped from him. So she simply said, "I am sorry." Nathan turned back to her, his eyes wet. "Sorry does not put a roof over my daughter's head." Serena met his gaze steadily. "I know, but it is a start." She turned and walked away, leaving him standing in the warehouse with his crates and his grief. But she was not giving up. She was just getting started. That evening, Serena found them at the community center on Maple Street. The building was old and worn, with water stains on the ceiling and linoleum floors that had seen better decades. But it was warm and clean, and the volunteers who worked there treated everyone with dignity regardless of their circumstances. Serena spotted Nathan sitting at a plastic table near the back, watching his daughter eat a bowl of soup. The little girl was talking animatedly about something, her hands moving through the air as she described what was clearly an epic adventure. A princess learning to sword fight, if Serena had to guess. Nathan noticed her approaching and stood immediately, positioning himself between Serena and his daughter like a shield. "I thought I made myself clear this morning," he said, his voice low and hard. Serena held up her hands in a gesture of peace. "I am not here to argue. I brought something." She reached into her bag and pulled out a folder. Inside were printouts of everything she had discovered. The falsified records alongside the real ones, screenshots of the security footage, timestamps from the digital logs, the internal memos that proved Nathan had been targeted. She set the folder on the table and slid it toward him. "I found out why you were really fired," she said quietly. "It was not about performance or restructuring. You were asking questions about deliveries that did not add up. Someone did not like that." Nathan stared at the folder for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he picked it up and began to flip through the pages, his hands trembling slightly. Serena explained everything while he read. Derek Palmer, Craig Lawson, the $3.7 million that had been siphoned from the company over 2 years. The shell companies, the offshore accounts, the elaborate scheme to cover their tracks. Nathan's reports about suspicious deliveries had gotten too close to the truth. So they had manufactured a reason to eliminate him. And Serena, trusting her team, had signed off on it without a second thought. "This says I missed 40 shifts last year," Nathan said finally, his voice raw. He was holding the falsified performance report, staring at it like it was written in a language he did not understand. "I did not miss a single day. I was there every morning at 6:30. Every single morning." His voice broke. "They just made it up. All of it. They made me look like someone I am not." "I know," Serena said, "and I am going to fix it." Nathan looked up at her, his expression somewhere between hope and disbelief. How do you fix this? My savings are gone. My credit is destroyed. My daughter does not have a home. How do you fix any of that?" Serena met his eyes steadily. "I do not know yet, but I am going to try. I am going to take this to the board, expose what Palmer and Lawson did, clear your name publicly." She glanced at the little girl who had stopped eating and was watching the two adults with wide, uncertain eyes. "Whatever happens next," Serena said, "you are not going to face it alone. Neither of you." Nathan shook his head slowly, his jaw tight. "Why? Why do you care?" "I am nobody to you. I am just a name on a spreadsheet." Serena was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was softer than it had been all evening. "Because I am the one who signed that spreadsheet. Because your daughter asked me something today that I cannot stop thinking about." Nathan frowned. "What did she ask you?" The question had come that morning at the warehouse when Serena had first arrived. The little girl had appeared seemingly out of nowhere, holding her stuffed bunny. looking up at Serena with eyes that seemed to see straight through to her soul. "Are you the reason my daddy cries at night?" Serena's throat tightened at the memory. "She asked me if I was the reason you cry at night," she said quietly. "And I think maybe I am. And that is something I need to fix." The little girl, Emma, slid off her chair and walked over to where they were standing. She looked at Serena with that same penetrating gaze, evaluating her with the uncanny wisdom of childhood. "Are you going to help my daddy?" Emma asked. Serena knelt down so she was at the little girl's level. "Yes, sweetheart, I am going to try." Emma nodded solemnly. "Okay. Daddy says people who try to fix things are good people." Serena felt something crack open in her chest, something she had kept locked away for 15 years. "Your daddy sounds very wise," she managed. "He is." Emma's voice was matter-of-fact. "He is the best daddy in the world. But he needs help sometimes. Everyone does." Serena looked at Nathan, who was watching the exchange with an expression she could not quite read. Pride, maybe. Exhaustion. The desperate hope of someone who had been drowning for too long. "I am going to take this to the board on Friday," she said. "I am going to expose everything. And whatever happens after that, I am going to make sure you get your life back." Nathan was silent for a long moment. Then slowly he nodded. "I do not trust you," he said. "Not yet. But I believe you are going to try. And right now that is enough." The board meeting was scheduled for Friday morning at 9 o'clock. Serena spent the 4 days leading up to it like a general preparing for battle. She gathered evidence, compiled documentation, and built a case so airtight that even the most skeptical board member would have to acknowledge the truth. Security footage, digital logs, bank records, internal communications. Everything she needed to expose Derek Palmer and Craig Lawson for what they really were. But she knew it would not be easy. Derek had allies on the board, people he had cultivated over years of careful manipulation. Craig had been with the company for 15 years and knew where all the bodies were buried. They would not go down without a fight. Late at night, alone in her office with the city lights glittering below, Serena found herself thinking about the photograph in her desk drawer. Daniel's crooked smile, her own face young and hopeful and impossibly naive. She had been a coward 15 years ago. She had let her father send Daniel away without fighting, without even trying to keep him. She had spent the years since then building walls around her heart, convincing herself that she was better off alone. But Nathan Cole was not Daniel. This was not about love or vulnerability or the fear of being hurt. This was about right and wrong, about a man who had done nothing wrong being punished for someone else's crimes, about a little girl who deserved to sleep in a bed instead of a car. This was about becoming the person she had always wanted to be. On Thursday evening, the story leaked. Serena was still in her office when her assistant burst through the door, face pale and phone clutched in her hand. "Miss Hayes, you need to see this." The headline was carefully worded to sound neutral while painting the most damaging picture possible. Hartwell's CEO allegedly uses company resources for former employee. The article cited anonymous sources close to the situation and hinted at an inappropriate relationship at corruption at a CEO who had lost her way. Social media exploded within hours. Business commentators called for her resignation. Former colleagues posted thinly veiled criticisms. The board members who had been supportive started sending concerned texts about the company's image and appropriate behavior. Someone had tipped off the press. Probably Derek or Craig, making a preemptive strike to discredit her before she could expose them. Serena read the article 3 times, her jaw clenched so tight it ached. They were trying to destroy her reputation before she could destroy theirs. They were betting that she would back down, that she would prioritize her career over doing the right thing. They did not know her at all. She picked up her phone and called her assistant. "Cancel my dinner plans for tonight. I have a press conference to prepare." Nathan saw the headline on a library computer the next morning. He had dropped Emma off early, wanting to use the computer lab to search for job listings before heading to the harbor. But the first thing that caught his eye was the news alert. Hartwell CEO faces backlash over former employee. His stomach dropped as he read the article. Anonymous sources, inappropriate relationship, questions about judgment and leadership. They were talking about him. They were using him to destroy Serena Hayes. For a moment he felt the familiar pull of resignation. This was how it always worked. The powerful protected each other, and the people at the bottom got crushed. Serena had promised to help him, but promises meant nothing when your career and reputation were on the line. She would back down. Everyone always backed down. But then he thought about the look in her eyes when she had knelt down to talk to Emma. The way her voice had cracked when she apologized. The folder full of evidence that she had gathered all the hours she must have spent digging for the truth. She had believed him when no one else did. She had fought for him when she had every reason not to. Maybe it was time for him to fight for her too. He left the library and drove to Hartwell Industries, his mind racing the entire way. He did not know what he was going to do when he got there. He did not know if they would even let him in the building. But he could not just sit back and watch Serena take the fall for trying to help him. Emma was safe at the library. Mrs. Chen would watch over her. Right now, Nathan had somewhere he needed to be. Friday morning dawned gray and cold, the sky heavy with clouds that threatened rain. Serena stood in front of her full-length mirror, studying her reflection with a critical eye. She had chosen her outfit carefully. A stunning red dress that fitted her like armor, sleek and professional, but undeniably powerful. Her blonde hair was swept back in an elegant twist, and her makeup was flawless. Diamond studs glittered at her ears, and her heels were high enough to put her at eye level with most of the men she would be facing. This was battle dress. This was the armor of a woman who refused to be intimidated. Outside Hartwell Industries, a crowd had gathered. Reporters with cameras and microphones, shareholders clutching coffee cups and worried expressions, employees who had heard the rumors and come to see the drama unfold. The story had spread overnight, growing more sensational with each retelling. Serena walked through the lobby with her head held high, ignoring the whispers and the stares. She had spent 15 years building a reputation as one of the most capable executives in the industry. She was not about to let Derek Palmer and Craig Lawson destroy everything she had worked for. The boardroom was on the 32nd floor, a glass-walled space with views of the city and a polished table that could seat 20. 12 faces stared at her when she walked in, some sympathetic, some openly hostile, most carefully neutral. Derek Palmer sat at the far end of the table, looking smug and self-satisfied. He was a large man with silver hair and the practiced charm of someone who had spent decades manipulating people to get what he wanted. Next to him, Craig Lawson fidgeted with a pen, his soft face pale and sweaty. They thought they had won. They thought the leaked story had already delivered the killing blow. They were wrong. Serena took her seat at the head of the table and opened her laptop without a word. The screen behind her lit up with the first slide of her presentation. "Before we begin," she said calmly, "I want to address the allegations that appeared in the press this morning." Derek leaned forward, his expression oozing false concern. "I think that would be wise, Serena. The shareholders are concerned. This kind of scandal is not good for anyone." Serena smiled thinly. "I could not agree more." She clicked to the next slide. It showed 2 documents side by side. Nathan Cole's real personnel file and the falsified version that had been used to justify his termination. "This is Nathan Cole," she said. 8 years of loyal service. 0 performance issues. 3 separate reports filed about suspicious activity in our supply chain. She paused, letting the words sink in. "And this is what someone did to his file." The room went silent. She clicked again. Security footage of Derek and Craig in conference room B, the manila folder passing between them. Click. Digital logs showing Craig's unauthorized access to Nathan's file at the exact timestamp. Click. Bank statements tracing phantom invoices to offshore accounts. Shell companies. Derek Palmer's brother-in-law listed as the primary signatory. 3. $7 million, Serena said. That is how much has been stolen from this company over the past 2 years. And when Nathan Cole started asking questions about shipments that did not add up, these two men decided to silence him. Derek shot to his feet so fast his chair scraped against the floor. This is ridiculous. His voice was loud, but Serena could hear the fear underneath. These documents are fabricated. She is trying to cover her own incompetence by throwing us under the bus. Serena turned to face him directly, her expression ice cold. Mr. Palmer, I have time-stamped video of you handing falsified documents to Mr. Lawson. I have digital forensics confirming that those documents were uploaded from Mr. Lawson's computer. I have bank records showing $3.7 million transferred to an account in the Cayman Islands that lists your brother-in-law as the primary signatory. She paused, letting the silence stretch. Would you like me to continue? Derek's face had gone gray. He looked around the table for support, but no one would meet his eyes. Even the board members who had been his allies were leaning away from him now, distancing themselves from the wreckage of his reputation. Craig Lawson was staring at the table, his pen forgotten on the floor. He looked like a man watching his life collapse in slow motion. Helen Marsh, a silver-haired woman who had been on the board for nearly 20 years, cleared her throat. I think we have heard enough, Miss Hayes. What do you recommend as next steps? Serena straightened her shoulders. I recommend immediate termination for Derek Palmer and Craig Lawson pending a full internal audit and cooperation with law enforcement. I also recommend that Nathan Cole be publicly exonerated and offered reinstatement with full back pay and benefits. Helen nodded slowly, her expression grim. And the press. Serena allowed herself a small smile. I will handle the press. The vote was unanimous. Outside the boardroom, a crowd had gathered. Not just reporters now, but employees and shareholders and curious onlookers who had seen the news and wanted to know what was happening. They packed the lobby, spilling out onto the sidewalk, a sea of faces illuminated by the flash of cameras. A podium had been set up near the main entrance, bristling with microphones and recording devices. Serena walked toward it with steady steps, her red dress standing out like a flame against the gray suits that surrounded her. Somewhere in the back of the crowd, she spotted a familiar figure. Nathan Cole standing alone, watching her with an expression she could not quite read from this distance. He had come. He was here. She turned to face the cameras. Good afternoon, she began. I am here to address the allegations that appeared in the press this morning and to share some important updates about our company. She took a breath, feeling the weight of hundreds of eyes on her. Over the past week, an internal investigation revealed significant fraud within Hartwell Industries. 2 senior managers, Derek Palmer and Craig Lawson, embezzled company funds and falsified employee records to cover their crimes. One of the people they targeted was Nathan Cole, a facilities coordinator who had been with us for 8 years. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Serena continued, her voice steady. Mr. Cole was wrongfully terminated. His records were falsified. He and his daughter were left homeless as a result. She paused, letting the words sink in. I signed the paperwork that authorized Mr. Cole's termination. I trusted my team to provide accurate information, and they betrayed that trust. But ultimately, the responsibility is mine. I failed Mr. Cole. I failed his daughter. And today, I am doing everything in my power to make it right. A voice shouted from the crowd. A man in an expensive suit, one of the business commentators who had called for her resignation that morning. What about the allegations that you have been using company resources for personal relationships? Sources say you have been seen with this former employee multiple times. Serena did not flinch. I have been meeting with Mr. Cole because I owed him an explanation and an apology. I have been meeting with him because his 7-year-old daughter has been sleeping in a car while the men who destroyed his career continued to steal from this company. Her voice hardened. If showing basic human decency to a wronged employee disqualifies me from leadership, then perhaps we need to reconsider what leadership means. The commentator opened his mouth to respond, but another voice cut through the noise. She is telling the truth. Every head turned. Nathan walked forward slowly, making his way through the crowd with Emma holding his hand. The little girl looked terrified by all the cameras and the noise, but she did not let go of her father. She just pressed closer to his side and clutched Mr. Whiskers against her chest. I did not want to believe her at first, Nathan said, his voice carrying in the sudden silence. I thought she was just trying to protect herself. Cover her tracks. He looked at Serena, and something passed between them that had nothing to do with business or corruption or the crowd that surrounded them. But she showed me everything. The fake documents, the stolen money. She did not have to do that. She could have just let me disappear and no one would have cared. He paused. But she cared. She is the only one who did. The reporters scattered to file their stories. Derek Palmer was escorted from the building by security, his face a mask of barely controlled rage. He said nothing as they led him away, but his eyes found Serena across the lobby, and the hatred in them was pure and undisguised. Craig Lawson had already called a lawyer. The crisis was not over, not by a long shot. There would be lawsuits and investigations and months of cleanup, but the worst had passed. Serena found Nathan and Emma waiting in the lobby away from the fading commotion. The little girl was sipping a juice box that someone had given her, her expression solemn and thoughtful. Thank you, Nathan said quietly, for what you said in there. You did not have to defend me like that. Serena shook her head. I was just telling the truth. That is all. She hesitated, then continued. I meant what I said about reinstatement. There is a position in our security division that I think would suit your skills. It is not facilities, but the pay is better and the hours are more flexible for someone with a child. Nathan blinked. You are offering me a job. I am offering you a chance, Serena said. What you do with it is up to you. Before Nathan could respond, Emma tugged on Serena's sleeve. Serena looked down at the little girl, surprised by the touch. Yes, sweetheart. Emma's voice was very small, but her eyes were steady. Are you going to help us find a house? The question hit Serena like a physical blow. She looked at Nathan, at the hope and fear warring in his expression, and then back at Emma, at this brave, wise, impossible child who had survived so much and still believed in the goodness of others. Something shifted inside Serena, something that had been locked away for 15 years since Daniel disappeared, and she had learned to stop trusting anyone but herself. Yes, sweetheart, she said softly. I think I am. 2 weeks later, Serena stood in the doorway of a brownstone apartment on the east side of the city, watching Nathan's face as he took in his new home. The apartment was on the 4th floor of a beautiful old building that Serena's grandmother had bought decades ago, long before the neighborhood became fashionable. Most of the units were rented to young professionals at market rate, but this one had been vacant for months, waiting for the right tenant. It had 2 bedrooms, a small kitchen with a window that faced the morning sun, and a living room just big enough for a couch and a bookshelf. The hardwood floors were scratched with age, and the bathroom fixtures were older than Serena, but the windows let in beautiful light and the radiators actually worked. It was by any measure a modest apartment, but to Nathan Cole, who had spent weeks sleeping in his car, it might as well have been a palace. The rent is covered for 6 months, Serena said. After that, we can work something out. She held up her hand before he could protest. And before you say anything, this is not charity. Consider it back pay for the weeks you should have been working, the weeks you would have been working if I had done my job properly. Nathan shook his head slowly, his eyes suspiciously bright. "I do not know how to thank you." "You do not have to thank me," Serena said, handing him the keys. "I am just trying to fix what I broke." She was about to leave when Emma came running out of the smaller bedroom, her face alight with joy. "Daddy, Daddy, come look. There is a bed. There is a real bed." Nathan's composure cracked. He pressed his hand against his eyes, and when he took it away, they were wet. Serena watched from the hallway, not coming inside. This was their moment, their space. She had no right to intrude on it. But before she could slip away, Emma came running out of the bedroom and threw her arms around Serena's legs, hugging her so hard that Serena nearly stumbled. "Thank you," Emma whispered against her hip. "Thank you for giving us a home." Serena stood very still. She was not used to this. She was not used to being touched by children, to being thanked with such simple, devastating sincerity. The last time someone had hugged her like this with such complete trust and gratitude, she had been a child herself. After a moment, she knelt down so she was at Emma's level. "You are welcome, sweetheart," she said softly. "But you should know something. The people at the company, the ones who said mean things about your dad, they were wrong. They were wrong about everything." She reached out and gently tucked a strand of hair behind Emma's ear. "Your father is a good man. One of the best I have ever met." Emma nodded solemnly. "I know. He is the best daddy in the world." Serena smiled, and for the first time since this whole nightmare began, the smile reached her eyes. "Yes," she said. "He is." She stood up and looked at Nathan, who was watching the exchange with an expression of raw emotion. "I will let you get settled," she said. "If you need anything, my number is on the paperwork." She turned to leave, but Nathan's voice stopped her. "Miss Hayes?" She looked back. "Yes." He was quiet for a moment, searching for words. Finally, he just said, "Thank you for believing me when no one else did." The months that followed were not easy, but they were better. Nathan started his new job in the security division on a Monday morning in early spring. He walked through the doors of Hartwell Industries with his head held high, wearing a new suit that Serena had insisted on buying him over his protests, and carrying a lunch that Emma had helped him pack. The work was different from facilities, more analytical, more focused on prevention than repair. But Nathan discovered that he was good at it. His years of noticing things that did not add up, of spotting discrepancies that others missed, made him a natural fit for the role. His colleagues were welcoming, especially after word spread about what had really happened with Derek Palmer and Craig Lawson. The two men had been arrested the previous month, and the investigation was ongoing, but the evidence was overwhelming. They would not be hurting anyone else. Emma started second grade at Lincoln Elementary, a school just 3 blocks from their new apartment. She made friends quickly. A girl named Maya who shared her love of fantasy novels, and a boy named Sam who taught her how to play chess. On weekends, Nathan took her to the park or the library or the little bakery on the corner that made croissants almost as good as the ones they used to get in their old neighborhood. Daddy, Emma said one Saturday morning, her mouth full of chocolate croissant, "This is the best life ever." Nathan laughed, ruffling her hair. "Yeah, sweetheart. It really is." Serena visited sometimes. Not often, and never without calling first. But she had become a fixture in their lives, a welcome presence that neither Nathan nor Emma questioned anymore. She would bring pastries from the French bakery near her office or books that she thought Emma might like, or just herself, sitting on the couch while Emma showed her drawings and Nathan made coffee in the kitchen. They did not talk about what had happened. They did not need to. The past was there always a shadow that connected them. But it was not the only thing anymore. Something else was growing between them. Something neither of them had expected or sought. A connection that had nothing to do with guilt or gratitude, and everything to do with who they were becoming together. Nathan found himself looking forward to her visits with an anticipation that had nothing to do with the help she had given him. And Serena, for her part, found herself making excuses to stop by more often than she needed to. Neither of them named it. Not yet. They were both too cautious, too wounded, too aware of how fragile this new beginning was. But it was there, growing quietly in the spaces between words. One evening, Serena arrived at the apartment looking different. It took Nathan a moment to figure out what had changed. Her hair was down instead of pulled back in its usual severe twist. She was wearing a soft cream-colored blouse instead of her usual power armor. And there was something in her eyes, something tired and vulnerable that he had never seen before. "Are you okay?" he asked as she sank onto the couch. Serena shook her head slowly. "I do not know. I am just tired." Emma was doing homework at the kitchen table, close enough to be supervised, but far enough to give them a semblance of privacy. Nathan handed Serena a cup of coffee and sat down beside her. "Do you want to talk about it?" For a long moment she did not say anything. Then so quietly he almost missed it. "I do not know how to do this." "Do what this?" She gestured vaguely at the apartment at him, at the domestic scene that surrounded them. "Be normal. Be with people. My whole life has been performance. Meetings and negotiations, and always having to be the smartest person in the room." She looked at him and her eyes were wet. "I do not know how to just be. Without armor. Without walls." Nathan was quiet for a moment, considering his words carefully. "Tell me something," he said, finally. "Something you have never told anyone." Serena laughed, but it was a broken sound. "You do not want to hear my sob stories." "Actually," Nathan said gently, "I do." And so she told him about Daniel. The words came slowly at first, then faster, as if a dam had broken somewhere inside her. She told him about the summer she was 19, about the groundskeeper who had made her feel seen for the first time in her life. About her father's rage when he discovered them. About Daniel's disappearance and the years of loneliness that followed. "I never found out what my father did," she said. "Whether he paid Daniel off or threatened him. I just know that one day he was there and the next day he was gone. And I spent the next 15 years convincing myself that it was better this way. That love was a weakness I could not afford." Nathan reached out and took her hand. Her fingers were cold, and she gripped his like a lifeline. "I am sorry," he said. "That sounds incredibly lonely." Serena let out a shaky breath. "It was. It is. I have a penthouse apartment that cost more than most people earn in a decade, and most nights I cannot stand to be there because the silence is too loud. So do not be there." The words came out before Nathan could think them through. "Be here instead. With us." Serena looked at him. Really looked at him, and something shifted in her expression. "You are different than I thought you would be," she whispered. "Who did you think I would be?" "I do not know." "Angry. Resentful. You had every reason to hate me." Nathan shook his head. "I was angry for a while. But then I realized something. The person who signed those papers and the person sitting on my couch right now are not the same. You have changed. You are still changing." He squeezed her hand gently. "And that takes courage. More courage than most people have." From the kitchen, Emma's voice called out, "Miss Serena, you do not have to try so hard. We already like you." Both adults turned to look at the little girl who was watching them with that disconcerting wisdom she sometimes displayed. "You can just be yourself here," Emma continued, as if explaining something obvious. "That is what home means. You do not have to pretend." Serena's eyes filled with tears. Real tears, not the careful, controlled kind she might shed during a difficult negotiation, but the messy, overwhelming kind that came from somewhere deep inside. "Thank you, Emma," she managed. That is the kindest thing anyone has said to me in a very long time." The first time Serena stayed for dinner, she did not know how to act. She sat rigidly at the small kitchen table while Emma chattered about her day and Nathan served spaghetti with sauce from a jar. Her hands were folded in her lap like she was at a business meeting, and she kept glancing around the apartment as if she expected someone to tell her she did not belong there. "It is not gourmet," Nathan apologized, setting a plate in front of her. "It is perfect," Serena said, and meant it. When was the last time anyone had cooked for her? When was the last time she had eaten dinner at a table with other people, without an agenda or a negotiation or a careful calculation of what each word might cost her? She could not remember. Emma watched her take the first bite, her expression expectant. "Do you like it?" "I love it," Serena said truthfully. Emma beamed. "Daddy's spaghetti is the best. He puts the secret ingredient in." "What is the secret ingredient?" "Love," Emma said solemnly. "That is what Mommy always said. The secret ingredient is love." Nathan's face tightened for just a moment, but then he smiled. "That is right, sweetheart. That is what Mommy always said." The dinners became a regular thing, twice a week, then 3 times. Serena would arrive after work, still in her business clothes, and change into the jeans and sweater she had started keeping in Nathan's hall closet. She helped Emma with homework, patiently explaining math problems and quizzing her on spelling words. She learned the names of Emma's friends, the plot of every book she was reading, the rules of chess that Sam had taught her. And she started to relax, started to laugh more easily, to speak without calculating every word, to let her guard down in ways she had not allowed herself in 15 years. One night Emma got sick. It was just a cold, nothing serious, but the little girl was miserable. Runny nose, watery eyes, the pathetic cough of a child who wanted nothing more than to be cuddled and told that everything would be okay. Nathan was exhausted from work, and the pharmacy was closed, and Emma was crying because her throat hurt, and she could not sleep. At 10 p.m. there was a knock at the door. Serena stood in the hallway holding a bag from the 24-hour pharmacy 2 miles away. Chicken soup from the deli near her office. Children's cold medicine. A new stuffed animal. A small white cat that she had spotted in a store window and thought Emma might like. "You did not have to come," Nathan said, his voice rough with gratitude and exhaustion. "I know," Serena said simply. "I wanted to." She sat on the edge of Emma's bed and smoothed the little girl's hair back from her forehead. She helped her take the medicine, coaxed her to eat a few spoonfuls of soup, read her a story in a soft voice until Emma finally drifted off to sleep. Later, Nathan found Serena in the kitchen washing the soup bowl. "You are nothing like the person I thought you were," he said quietly. She did not turn around. "Who did you think I was?" "Cold. Untouchable. The kind of person who signs papers without reading them." Serena was silent for a moment. Then, so quietly he almost missed it. "I was that person. I do not want to be anymore." Nathan stepped closer, close enough to feel the warmth of her presence without quite touching her. "You are not that person," he said. "Not to us." Serena finally turned to face him, and in the dim light of the kitchen, with her hair loose and her feet bare and all her walls finally down, she had never looked more beautiful. "I do not know what I am doing," she whispered. "I have never had this. A family. People who actually care about me." Nathan reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "Neither have I," he admitted. "Not since Grace. But maybe we can figure it out together." Serena leaned into his touch just slightly, just enough to let him know that she felt it too. Whatever this was, whatever they were becoming, it was real, and neither of them wanted to run from it anymore. One evening in late spring, Nathan found Serena sitting on the fire escape outside his living room window. The sun was setting over the city, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and gold. Serena had brought a bottle of wine but had not opened it. She was just sitting there, legs dangling over the edge, watching the light change over the rooftops. She had changed out of her work clothes into something softer. A cream-colored blouse, faded jeans, bare feet. Her blonde hair was loose around her shoulders, catching the fading sunlight like spun gold. "Mind if I join you?" Nathan asked, climbing through the window. Serena shook her head and he settled beside her, their shoulders almost touching. For a long time, neither of them spoke. They just watched. The sky listened to the distant sounds of traffic and children playing, breathed in the warm spring air. Finally, Serena said, "I have been thinking about what comes next." Nathan looked at her. "For the company?" She shook her head slowly. "For us." The word hung in the air between them, heavy with possibility. Us. Such a small word for such a complicated thing. Nathan was quiet for a moment, considering. Then he said, "I have been thinking about that too." Serena turned to face him. In the fading light, her eyes were the color of honey, warm and vulnerable and impossibly beautiful. And Nathan reached over and took her hand. Her fingers were cold despite the warm evening, and he held them, gently warming them between his palms. "I think," he said slowly, "that we have both been through a lot. We are both still figuring out who we are and what we want. And I think rushing into anything would be a mistake." Serena nodded, a flicker of disappointment crossing her face. But Nathan was not finished. "But I also think," he continued, "that you are the most remarkable person I have ever met. You had every reason to protect yourself, to let me stay lost, and you did not. You fought for me when I could not fight for myself. You gave my daughter a home." He squeezed her hand gently. "I do not know what the future looks like, but I know I want you in it, if that is something you want too." Serena was quiet for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "I have never been good at this. Relationships, vulnerability, letting people in." She looked down at their joined hands. "My whole life I have kept everyone at arm's length because it was safer. Because people always leave or disappoint you or turn out to be something other than what they seemed." She looked up at him and her eyes were wet. "But you are different. You and Emma. You are real in a way that nothing else in my life has ever been. And it terrifies me." Nathan lifted her hand and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "It terrifies me too," he admitted. "But maybe that is okay. Maybe being scared means it matters." Serena laughed softly, a sound he had rarely heard from her. A real laugh, unguarded and free. "When did you become so wise?" Nathan smiled. "Probably somewhere between sleeping in my car and having a 7-year-old therapist." The fire escape door opened and Emma poked her head out. She was wearing her favorite pajamas, the ones with the little rockets on them, and her hair was still damp from her bath. "Daddy, Miss Serena." "What are you doing out here?" Nathan held out his free arm and Emma climbed into his lap, snuggling against his chest. Serena watched them with an expression of such tenderness that Nathan's heart ached. "We are watching the sunset, sweetheart," he said. "Want to join us?" Emma nodded sleepily. She looked at Serena, then at their joined hands, and a small smile crossed her face. "Are you and Miss Serena going to be friends forever?" Nathan glanced at Serena. She met his eyes, and something passed between them. Not a promise, not yet, but an understanding, a possibility. "Yeah, baby," Nathan said softly. "I think we might be." Emma yawned and nestled closer. "Good," she murmured. "I like Miss Serena. She is not cold like everyone says. She is warm, like us." Serena reached out and gently stroked Emma's hair. Her hand was trembling slightly. "Thank you, Emma," she whispered. "That is the nicest thing anyone has ever said to me." They sat there together as the sun slipped below the horizon and the first stars began to appear. Three people brought together by circumstance and injustice and the stubborn refusal to give up. They did not know what tomorrow would bring. They did not know if the fragile thing growing between them would survive the challenges ahead. But in that moment on that fire escape, watching the sky turn from gold to violet to the deep blue of evening, none of that mattered. They had found each other. And for now, that was enough. 1 year later, Nathan stood at the altar of a small chapel overlooking the harbor. It was the same harbor where he had once loaded cargo ships for cash, wondering if his life would ever get better. The same harbor where Serena had found him at his lowest point and refused to let him give up. He wore a simple gray suit that Serena had helped him pick out, and his hands were steady despite the nervous flutter in his chest. Behind him, through the chapel windows, the sun was setting over the water in shades of orange and gold. Emma walked down the aisle first, scattering flower petals with the focused concentration of a girl who had been given an important job. She was 8 now, taller and more confident, but she still clutched Mr. Whiskers whenever she needed comfort. Today the worn stuffed bunny was tucked safely in her father's jacket pocket waiting for her. Then the music changed, and Serena appeared at the back of the chapel. She wore a simple white dress, no designer label, nothing extravagant. She had insisted on that. "I want to marry you as Serena," she had said. "Not as the CEO, just me." Her blonde hair was loose around her shoulders, and she carried a small bouquet of wildflowers that Emma had helped her pick. But what Nathan noticed most was her face. The radiant smile, the tears that shimmered in her eyes, the pure, uncomplicated joy that transformed her features. She had never looked more beautiful. When she reached him, she took his hands in hers, and he could feel her trembling. "You look amazing," he whispered. "You are stuck with me now," she whispered back. "Best deal I ever made." The ceremony was simple and heartfelt. No elaborate speeches or religious rituals, just two people who had found each other against impossible odds, making promises they intended to keep. When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, Emma leapt up from her seat and threw herself at both of them, wrapping her arms around them in a fierce, joyful hug. "We are a family now," she declared, her voice muffled against Serena's dress. "A real family. Like I always knew we would be." Serena knelt down so she was at Emma's level, cupping the little girl's face in her hands. "We were always a real family, sweetheart," she said softly. "The paperwork is just catching up." The reception was held at the same community center where Nathan and Emma had once eaten free meals and taken hot showers. Nathan had insisted on it. "This place gave us hope when we had nothing," he said. "It seems right to celebrate here." Serena had agreed without hesitation. She had donated enough money to renovate the building and expand its services, but she had done it anonymously. Some things she had learned were more meaningful when no one knew you had done them. As the evening wound down and the guests began to leave, Nathan found himself standing by the window looking out at the city lights. Grace was watching from somewhere, he was sure of it. She would be proud. She would be so proud of who Emma had become, of the family they had built from the ashes of everything they had lost. He finally understood what she had meant all those years ago. Do not forget to live. He had spent 3 years surviving, going through the motions, doing what needed to be done without ever really feeling alive. But now, standing in this room full of laughter and love with his daughter dancing with her new mother, and his heart so full it felt like it might burst, he understood. Living was not about avoiding pain. It was about opening yourself up to joy even when you knew that joy could be taken away. It was about loving fiercely even when love meant risking everything. It was about choosing hope every single day, even when hope seemed impossible. Serena appeared beside him, sliding her hand into his. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. Nathan looked at his wife, at this woman who had seen him at his lowest point, and chosen to lift him up instead of walking away. "I am thinking about how lucky I am," he said. "How grateful I am that you stopped your car that day in the rain." Serena smiled, leaning her head against his shoulder. "I did not stop," she reminded him gently. "I drove right past. It took me 3 days to find the courage to do the right thing." "But you did it," Nathan said. "That is what matters. You did it." Emma came running over Mr. Whiskers in one hand and a slice of cake in the other. "Daddy, Mommy. Come dance with me, Mommy." The word still made Serena's breath catch every time Emma said it. They had talked about it for weeks before the wedding, whether it was appropriate, whether it was too soon, whether Grace would have wanted it. In the end, it had been Emma who decided. "You are not replacing my first mommy," she had explained with the matter-of-fact wisdom that made her seem decades older than her 8 years. "You are my other mommy. Like having two of something good. That is even better." Now, Serena took Emma's hand and let herself be pulled onto the dance floor. Nathan followed, wrapping his arms around both of them as they swayed to the music. 3 people, 1 family. Built from broken pieces held together by love. Derek Palmer was sentenced to 7 years in federal prison for embezzlement and fraud. Craig Lawson, who had cooperated with investigators, received 3 years. The money they had stolen was recovered and returned to the company, and the employees who had been wrongfully terminated were offered compensation and apologies. Nathan eventually became head of Hartwell Industries' security division, using his eye for detail and his natural integrity to prevent anyone else from suffering what he had suffered. Serena stepped back from her CEO role after 5 years, choosing to spend more time with her family while remaining as chairwoman of the board. Emma graduated from high school with honors, went on to study social work, and dedicated her career to helping families in crisis, the kind of families she and her father had once been. Sometimes the greatest blessings come disguised as devastation. Sometimes losing everything is how we find what truly matters. And sometimes when we are at our lowest point, the right person appears and says the words that change everything. You are with me. Friends. If this story touched your heart, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more heartwarming tales. Your support means the world to us and helps us bring you more stories like this one. Drop a comment below if you believe in second chances. We would love to hear your thoughts. And if you know someone who is going through a difficult time right now, share this video with them. Sometimes a story is exactly what someone needs to remember, that their darkest chapter might just be the beginning of something beautiful. Thank you for watching, and we will see you in the next one.